Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode number 1034, 1034 for the 10th of November, 2025. It's the weekly show for weather geeks, dweebs, nerds, dorks, and weenies. This is the pre-show, magical part of the program where we typically do three things. We share boring personal stories, sometimes very boring, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time we say outrageous things. So here we are on the 10th of November, and it snowed in parts of my state today. And this is a very low latitude state. Yeah, buddy. Absolutely love it. Now, we got a good show. November 10th for history buffs, you're aware of what happened on this date in 1975, 50 years ago today. We had the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And for older people like me, my middle name is Old, we clearly recalled the song done by Gordon Lightfoot in the 70s about that horrific incident involving a wicked, wicked storm. When the gales of November come early. And 29 people died on that iron ore carrier. And we'll talk about that. That'll be, I think, our main topic of discussion tonight. But glad you're here listen, we're about to celebrate our 20th birthday here. You know, we celebrated episode number 1000 earlier this year. We were live all together. Thanks to Bob Barron, our friends at Barron Weather up in Huntsville, Alabama. They got us together, and I don't think we'll do an in-person show, but we need to do something for our 20th anniversary. I mean, come on. How many podcasts are 20 years old? We started in January of '06. And so here we are. Who'd have thunk it? We're still here. So anyway, that's coming up soon. But anyway, we got some weather issues to talk about. Got a whopper of a trough in the east. Lake effect snow up north. Snow flurries down here. The mountains of western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, getting some good snow. Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge. Yeah, it's been a fun day, a cold day. But thankfully for us, these early season cold snaps don't last long. So I see some of our guests are awaiting admission into the session here. Do we let them in? Sure we do. Why not? That's what we do. I know that we've got Bill Murray that will be out tonight, but I think everybody else is back. I know Jen, I think she is back. Of course, Jen, for years and years, she was in Ohio. But Jen picked up stakes, and she is now moving around the country, roaming. I like it. So we'll find out where she is. I know she's been in Southwest Florida for a while, but I think she's up in Virginia, somewhere like that. But we'll find out tonight her specific location. And a lot of people have asked about when is Neil going to be back on the show. Dr. Neil Jacobs, one of our regulars. For those that don't know, Neil is now the administrator of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And what a time to take over that agency with a government shutdown. So obviously, while that's happening, he can't. He promises he will be back, but obviously during a situation like this, he cannot. I've heard some grumblings today that just maybe, there's been some progress and we'll get the government back open this week. I sure hope so. I cannot imagine our friends that have been working for the National Weather Service, no pay. Goodness gracious. They dealt with a hurricane, our friends of the Hurricane Center. We had Melissa. All this happening during a government shutdown. It's a mess. But anyway, we'll get, I think Rick Smith's going to be on with us. And of course, Rick is, for those that don't know, Rick is a Weather Service employee. He is the warning coordination meteorologist at Norman. And, of course, John Gordon, who is our regular now. John, for many years, was a meteorologist in charge. His last position was MIC of the Weather Service in Louisville, Kentucky. And so we'll hear from John tonight, and hopefully everybody will be here. It's a little weird. We're 6 minutes away from showtime, and it's only me. And I do see two of our guests. Tom and Fred, can you guys hear me? Am I
Yeah, I can hear
talking to myself?
you.
Is there anybody home?
Can you hear me? I can hear you just fine.
I bet you there's somebody home. I sure hope so because these are our two guests for this evening. Maybe it's just me. If it's just me, we can go on a 2-hour rant. I've got all kind of things to rant about. It's funny. I go back and listen to WeatherBrains episode number 1, and I was griping about too many tornado warnings and high false alarm ratio problems, and nothing has changed in 20 years. In fact, I think I've got show 1 loaded in here. Yeah, here it is. This is show number 1. I personally think we have way too many warnings. Severe thunderstorm warnings are a dime a dozen, and it's getting to be that way with tornado warning.
Welcome to WeatherBrains, the podcast about weather by weather fans. I'm David Black with the Weather Company from Birmingham, Alabama, welcoming you to our first program. With me tonight, James Spann, the chief meteorologist of
Yeah, the voice is David Black. David, we actually for this show when it started 20 years ago, it was a really professional show. I mean, it was produced well. It was, of course, audio only. We had no video, but it was a tightly produced 30-minute audio show, just kind of like old school broadcast. And David did an amazing job, and it was so great that David was flown in at our 1,000 show episode number 1,000 in Huntsville. So it was great to see David. David lives down in on the eastern shore of Mobile Bay now at Fairhope, but he was the first voice host of WeatherBrains, and we were just the Stooges back then. But somehow the Stooges morphed and took over, and that's when it went right down the tubes, and we got into video, and we went from a 30-minute tightly produced show to a 2-hour show. I think our record length is 3 hours and 10 minutes. I need to do some Weather Brains trivia for the 20th birthday, but I want to say we did one show that went over 3 hours a ways back. All right, John, can you hear me? Is anybody
Yeah.
home?
Yeah. Hi, James. How are you? Good to see you.
So talk to me.
Can you hear me okay?
So I actually might have an audio problem here. Hang on.
Okay.
Uh,
I hear you loud and clear.
let's
Tom,
see
Fred, are
here.
you there?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, John.
Yeah, it's
Okay. Hi.
clearly
Good. Good.
me because I'm not hearing you guys. So I'm gonna
Fred, can you hear
restart
us?
little program here. I'll be right back.
Yep, I can hear you just fine, John.
Hey, Tom. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on, man.
No problem.
I hear you now. We're
Fred,
good. That was my bad.
good. Okay. Good. No, good.
Moron.
Yeah. No, it's great to see you, James. And this is a great show tonight. This is going to be one of your best shows.
No, I feel good about this. I mean, listen, I am the oldest person here, and when the Edmund Fitzgerald went down, I was 19 years old in 1975, and I was an electrical engineering major. That was my first major in college was electrical engineering. A lot of people don't know this. I was a double E major for 3 years, and I worked my way through college at a rock and roll AM radio station, playing rock and roll music on the radio, making $1.65 an hour, and that's how inexpensive college was back in the '70s, which is insane. Now I had no expenses; I lived at home, but I literally paid for college tuition, making $1.65 an hour, playing these songs, and so the songs of the '70s, it was the soundtrack of my life. I could close my eyes. I can see the album cover. I can see the 45 label. I know the intro time. I know the outro time. These were vinyl records. And so the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald came along, and I'm thinking, man, what a story. And at first, I honestly was not aware of the fact that it was a true story. And I learned very quickly that it was. And the song was accurate. And here's the problem, John. I can't play it because if I play the song, we'll be
I
banned from
know.
YouTube. we we
But
it's
one of my students made this for me.
oh
This
wow.
is the whole song written out with rough C's.
Wow. Wow.
I also
That's
have the
outstanding.
Fitzgerald. Here's the Fitzgerald. Here we go. I'm wearing my Fitzgerald shirt from Whitefish Bay. And we have more Fitzgerald stuff.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. So I'm going to learn a lot tonight. I mean, in 50 years, every year I try and learn a little more about it, but I think this is going to be the peak knowledge that I'm going to get on what actually happened during that horrific storm in November 1975. So,
Hey, Fred, can you hear us? Can we just check with Fred?
I
Fred,
can hear
James,
you. I can't, I don't think I'm visible. I can clearly hear you.
Okay, we can't see you. Maybe Jen or James or Rick can help you.
yeah, again, Fred, about 75% of the people that consume this show, they listen. So having video is not totally critical. It's okay, but about 25% do watch. So, um, uh, I don't know what type of camera you have, but if you down in the, or if you're on a phone or a tablet or whatever, but there is if the little video button gives you an option to choose what video source that you're using, which might help. Um,
Well,
Beyond that,
normally,
if you can't make it work, it's okay. In fact, people tell me I should leave mine off. I'd look a lot better with a black square. um, so, but anyway, at the beginning, and again, you guys are probably trying to talk to me. I had a error here. I had a bad button pushed on the audio side, so we are now good to go here. Um, let's see, Mike. Yeah, I'm good, and you guys are good. All right, we're good. And welcome to our television audience. For those that are watching on the TV side, it's about a minute after the top of the hour, and it's just cold. We have no weather issues here. It's WeatherBrains Monday night, our weather party. So let's get her started. All right, track 1 is recording. Track 2 is recording. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
WeatherBrains episode number 1034, 1034. This is for the 10th of November, 2025. It was going to be a good show tonight. For those that are true weather geeks, and most of you are, many of you are aware of what happened weather-wise in the weather world on this date 50 years ago, and that's going to be the subject of the show tonight, and I promise it's going to be a really good one. But let's quickly go around the horn. I see Rick Smith is back on the line. Rick, are you open for business again? What's the status here?
Yes, sir. Doing fine. Just a little under the weather last week, but feeling much better. And I'm ready to learn a lot about this. I'm ashamed to admit how little I know about this, other than the song. So I'm pretty pumped to hear the stories and to learn a lot more about this event.
So, any news on the government opening back up?
Nope.
Oh,
I mean,
boy.
there's movement discussions going on, but I don't know. We're just I'm in I'll believe it when I see it mode still at this point. So
Yeah, I can totally understand that. So I hear things and I don't know what to believe anymore. But yeah,
Exactly.
I'll believe it when I see it. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Hey, Jen's on here. Jen. So you are on your endless journey, and you have moved away from Florida. And would you like to disclose or give us a hint of your location tonight?
I will give a hint. I am can you hear me okay? I am in
Yes.
the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. I'm
Ooh.
north of Charlottesville. I went to the Mid-Atlantic Severe Weather Conference in Richmond Saturday. I got to see so many people. I met Mark Sudduth for the first time in person. He did a great talk. John, is it Banghoff? Is that how you say his last name? From State College office, best
The
hair.
man with the golden hair. Golden
Awesome hair.
Yes, yes.
Hair is just as gorgeous in person. He's such a sweet guy. It was awesome to meet him in person as well. I drove all the way up to Pennsylvania to pick up Nelson to bring him back to the conference. So I had not seen him in over a year since he's been involved with the Otis project. So it's been great. This week I have Zach with me. We are doing history all week. We're probably going to end up hitting about 15 places. One of the big stops will be in La Plata, Maryland. We're actually going to move ourselves up there to do a whole day of research on all those events, and then into Richmond for a couple of days to go to the Library of Virginia and look at a lot of events. So this is what I've been gearing up for, guys, is to hit the road and hit these places. And this is just my first really big stop this year, and then I'll head home. And then next year, I've already got stuff thinking in my mind here. February, March, and April, I'll be doing a lot of events. So I love it. This is where I'm supposed to be. I love it.
I'm nosy. How many miles do you have on your car now?
Yeah.
Well, considering the fact in June I had 1 mile, I bought a new car.
Oh.
It now has 8,500 miles.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's gonna get some mileage going on here, but hey, that's
No,
the way it goes.
that's good. No, that you buy a car to use a car. That's the way it ought to be. I mean, I like it a lot. I heard the voice of Troy Kimmel, who was on the line. Troy, what's so we're in the deep freeze down here in the deep south. By the way, Jen, have you had any snow flurries today? Any snow up there?
Just a couple, yeah, but it was a little too mild for us today. But up in Ohio, I noticed for my mom, she was she was complaining. She's like, "I'm all bundled up. It snowed." So
We actually had snow down here in North Alabama today. I
Yeah.
mean, flurries and no impact, but obviously when there's one flake flying in this state, people go into full panic mode. So we had to just calm people down during the middle of the day. So to Troy, I would assume you actually perhaps had a high under 90 today. Rumor has it.
Well, we have a lot of flakes around here. They're not meteorological, but at the same time, I love Austin, but you know what they say, keep Austin weird. No, this is the first day, I think, with a max below 70 here, probably back into the spring. So we barely got above 60. And I look over here on the National Weather Service MMTS set of equipment, and we're sitting at about 44.7 here right now. So it's a little bit chilly outside, but we do see a big warm up, highs back to the mid 80s by the end of the week. And kind of watching this next storm system. This thing is dynamic as the models are really showing coming through the plain states, southern plains, and then lifting northeastward. But need to watch that for what I guess, John, late Saturday into Saturday night, early Sunday, and there.
I know at Alabama Weather Central, home of James Spann, they are sitting there like the Batman and Robin, waiting for this wave to come across. Troy.
Yep. Well, we got another one. If you, depending, it's not that we can get anything right for tomorrow, but at the same time, if you go look at the models and especially the 500 millibar flow and what they're saying, there's another cartwheel bowling ball, I call them sometimes, coming in after this one for the middle part of next week. Of course, we'll have to watch that and see how that works out. But finally, also a chance of rain here. That's the main thing.
To say this is a positive in that you get some rain finally.
Yeah. They're saying maybe the QPF tonight, which means a quarter or a half inch today, and means you don't get any rain when we finally get there. But the QPF today is about 4 to 5 tenths of an inch for Austin, and we could certainly use that.
There's always hope. Yep. Dr. McLean is on the line from Oklahoma. I said, by the way, James Adelot is out tonight. Bill is out and James Adelot is out, but Kim is here. Kim, how are you, ma'am? How's life in the commissioner world?
Life in the commissioner world is good. I admit I'm excited about us having a little bit of cold weather. I am a little sad we just totally skipped over fall, but I'm glad summer's over. So if we just go barreling into winter, I thought it was appropriate for us coming into this anniversary date. I was watching my hometown radar back in northern Indiana last night, and there was quite a system that came in off of Lake Michigan, and it was one of those classic witch of November comes slashing kind of events, and I was grateful not to be there for it. I don't miss it a bit. Winter in Oklahoma is amazing.
Well, I saw some of the video, Kim, from up in Chicago on the eastern, right on the shoreline there, and even within the loop in Chicago, the lightning and the snow video last night. And then, I was watching social media a couple of days ago, and they said, well, maybe some snow spouts. And I'm sitting there going, what the heck is a snow spout? And
What?
then you saw pictures, and there were snow spouts out over Lake Michigan. So I was saying, okay, they can have that. I'll stick with the 44.7.
Yep. Oh, if you've never seen lake effect snow coming off of Lake Michigan or
Yep.
any of the Great Lakes, it is just unlike anything else. You get a lot of really interesting turbulent flows and a lot of things concentrated close to the ground, right? Close to the surface.
Right.
So you can actually see through some of the features in a way that you don't with a broader system or, oriented snowfall. So all that to say, man, yeah, we were talking to my cousins and saw what they were going through. They got something like 10 inches where I'm from, and then closer to the lake got even more than that. And my parents moved down here with us when I came to Oklahoma, and they were just looking at it going, "Don't miss it at all! Don't miss it at all!"
but they moved in with you. No offense, Kim. I love you, and I would be there, but just not during tornado season. That they moved in with you, okay, or moved down there with y'all, okay.
They're across town. They've got their own. My mom and I are both independent.
They're out of Tornado Alley then. Okay.
Oh yeah, she was excited. She was thrilled to move to Tornado Alley. You kidding? Yeah, there were a lot of benefits, but missing winter is this is a great place if you're a retiree and don't want to go to Florida. Think about the plains. It's really nice here.
Yep.
Kim is the queen of large hail, Troy.
No,
so,
that's exactly what I was thinking too. I said, good grief, but I understand that because I talked to a lot of folks that come down here and even parts of South Texas, what we call the snowbirds, and they come down here and they said, the heck with that. We'll be gone for 4 or 5 months and then we'll go back.
Yep, it's the way it works. All right, John Gordon, let's start this show. I feel I cannot wait to learn. I'm here to soak up some knowledge here. So let's bring in our guests. Go.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, James. By the way, we hit 34 today, and we did have snow. It was a tad on the chilly side. So tonight, folks, this is all about the Edmund Fitzgerald. All right. This event profoundly changed my life. One of the reasons I became a meteorologist. So let's just get this up, James Spann. So in the 1970s, there were some major weather events. Pick one, James. 1970s. Pick one event.
Well, I have to pick the super outbreak of April 3rd, 4th, 1974, because it was a life changer for me. We all have these life-changing events, and the 70s was very violent, and so many things happened. But for me, as a teenager involved in ham radio and communication and volunteering for 3 days, it was a life changer. So the first one that comes to mind for me is the super outbreak of 1974.
I would have picked that too. Troy, what's yours? Pick one. This is like Family Feud, Troy. Pick one.
I just, I would have gone April 3rd and 4th because I'm like James, even sitting in San Marcos, Texas, where I was in high school at that point. That's all I remember for a few days, just kind of watching it from down there. But I also remember in the late 70s, we had the floods up on the Guadalupe River from some of the heavy rain events. That was a major flood into Canyon Lake. And I think that was in the late 70s.
What about Terrible Tuesday, Troy?
Yeah,
Wichita Falls.
Yeah, that's right.
April of 79.
Yep.
And in Mississippi, Troy, you had the Delta outbreak in 71.
Well, and then I'd say April 19th, 1970, because I never shut up and don't mention that one, but that's the Corinth, Mississippi tornado that killed a number of people, and it's been the worst tornado that Corinth has ever seen. So.
Right.
North Birmingham, April 5th, 1977. Dr. Fujita flew that one, and he actually thought about retooling the whole system and calling that an F6. J.B. Elliott told that story on here one time, but so there were so many things. But I bet you Rick Smith's got one.
Rick, you got one? Come on the board.
Just checking the list off all the good ones y'all are taking, but one that hit me. It was a local personal one, but in November of 1973, there was a tornado that hit in northwest Mississippi, just south of Memphis. That's where I grew up. And remember, my brother was in the hospital, and my nephew was born right around there. So had 3 family members in the hospital, and that was just a very impactful tornado. It had a mobile home park, and I don't know if anybody died, but being a kid and being completely terrified and completely obsessed with tornadoes, that one kind of sticks in my brain from
Was
the
that
70s.
was that north of Clarksdale? I assume it's north of Clarksdale.
Now, this was like South Haven, Horn Lake, right, like DeSoto
Okay.
County,
Oh,
right,
right in Memphis,
far
Metro. Okay.
northwest Mississippi. Yeah.
So we got the Big Thompson Canyon flash flood. We got Johnstown, Pennsylvania. We got two major blizzards at 78, the Cleveland bomb, the New England blizzard. We had Hurricane David. We had Eloise. The 70s was the weather. Fredericks,
Yep,
Mobile
you're right.
Bay, double I in Mobile Bay. The 70s, folks, if max velocity was around, the world would just be explosive. I'm telling you. It's just the 70s was the bomb. It was it. And then there was the Fitzgerald. So tonight, our guest, we have Frederick Stonehouse. Fred Stonehouse, he's authored 30 books on maritime history. The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, Great Lakes Lighthouse Tales are some of the best sellers. He wrote a book called The Haunted Lakes, Wreck Ashore, the U.S. Life-Saving Service on the Great Lakes. He's been a consultant to the United States Park Service, the Parks Canada, on-air expert for National Geographic and the Fox family. He's won all kinds of awards. Historian of the Year at the Maritime Historic Society of Detroit. Welcome, Fred. I don't know if you can still hear us, Fred. Are you there?
I'm here, but can anybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Loud
We
and
can't
clear.
see, but we want to hear you. Okay. So welcome, Fred. And our other guest is Tom Holquist. Tom came through for me at the NWA in 08. He spoke on the Fitzgerald in Louisville. Do you remember, Tom?
I definitely do.
Okay, you grew up in Rhode Island. He was spurred on by winter storms, occasional tropical storm, or hurricane up on the in New England. Did you go to school with Cantori at Linden State?
He was just a couple years prior to me. He was actually in class with Dave Valley, who you probably know, another weather
Yeah,
service.
I know Dave.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Went to Linden State, worked at Grand Rapids, and the big thing is he was the science officer in Marquette. Okay. And you were there for what, 7 years, 6, 7 years up there?
Yeah, like 6.5, 7. Yep.
Okay. And you're currently, you've moved around. You're currently working for the Environmental Modeling Center. You're the head of the verification post-processing.
I'm not the head.
That's hard to say. So welcome very much. Thank you for coming on, both you guys. So let's start off. I'll ask James Spann a question. What area of the United States has the most shipwrecks, James Spann? This is your big moment.
The most shipwrecks. Wow. I guess I should be saying like Galveston or maybe Miami, but I would assume that I'm way too far south on those
Great
guesses.
You're a tad south, just a tad. You might want to go a little further north.
Great Lakes.
Where
Way
is
down, way down.
Shipwreck Coast? Yeah, Troy, where is Shipwreck Coast?
I'm saying the Great Lakes, but I'm Michigan. I like Michigan. I don't know.
So, Fred, tell us about the shipwrecks of the Great Lakes. Where is this place?
Where is this place? Well, again, it's right in the middle of the country, but we've got about 6,500 shipwrecks that we can account for. That's a soft number. We keep finding more. We keep finding records of additional. So it almost comes down to how you want to qualify a shipwreck. Does it have to be 500 feet long? Can it be 50 feet long? What about a fishing boat? What happens if it's taken ashore and recovered? Is that a shipwreck? All kinds of little tidbits around it, but the basic point being there's an awful lot of them. And the last big one we've had was the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Sir, so the Lake Superior, the way I saw it, Fred, was over 500 shipwrecks. Is that correct?
About 550.
Okay.
The least of any of the lakes.
The least?
The least, well, we have the least traffic. When you look at the storm coming through, and if there's lots of targets called ships, then you can really have devastation. If there's a great lake like Lake Superior that only does heavy industry shipping, mostly iron ore, coal related, you're not going to have the same opportunity to sink ships.
Okay, so for our listeners, what is the lake that has the most shipwrecks on the Great Lakes?
That would typically be Lake Michigan, Chicago, Milwaukee, Straits of Mackinac, Benton Harbor, Muskegon, all the shipping ports.
Okay. Okay. And the area they call Shipwreck Coast, do you have any comments? And tell us, our listeners, where that is exactly.
Well, of course, waves on the Great Lakes are formed by wind. And of course, as you guys know, the wind on Lake Superior is going to be primarily north or northwest or maybe a northeast variation. So if you're a ship moving on the eastern end of Lake Superior, you will be very prone to being blown ashore, especially in the early days, and sent on the beach, either in calm water or full gale. And that then becomes the shipwreck coast. We can count about 120 wrecks in there in an area about 40 to 50 miles long. So it's much like the coast of New Jersey, North Carolina, Outer Banks. Many of the shipwrecks are right available.
Okay. And that area is from like Munising to Whitefish Point. Is that correct?
Munising is a little bit far to the west, but almost.
Okay. Okay. What's it like for the ships to be on Lake Superior? Tell our listeners what it's like when just when it's calm versus when you have a storm like the Fitzgerald went through.
When it's calm, it's heaven, and when it's a fit storm, it's hell. Again, you're in the middle of a freshwater hurricane. Can't say hurricane. You guys don't allow hurricanes to go to the Great Lakes, but you certainly can exceed 74 miles an hour with some of the blasts. The night the Fitzgerald sank, for example, the recorded winds at the Mackinac Bridge were 95 miles an hour. The streets of Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, especially the ones that line the canal, the shipping canal, were under 3.5 feet of water. And that was all blown water coming in from the west.
Is that the worst storm on record on Lake Superior? Do you know that, Fred?
No, it's not. Not by any means. The big storm came.
Tell us about that.
The big storm came through in 1913. That basically wrecked 47 ships. 9 of them were modern freighters, steel freighters that disappeared with all crew. The last one, in fact, was found about a month and a half ago. 250 dead sailors in total for the storm. Only about 25 or so on that ship.
That was just found recently?
Recently, that was a Canadian vessel called the Crothers, grain hauler coming down bound that got caught on Lake Huron.
Wow.
But of course, as you know too, so much of the problem is weather forecasting and lack thereof. So the captains obviously did their own without any other opportunity.
Yeah.
Some wasn't good.
Yeah.
And you had
just amazing.
You had the same economic pressures on ship owners and ship captains to get the product through. And stopping in dock and waiting for the storm to pass is not going to be not acceptable.
Back then, they just went no matter what. Is that right, Fred? They just went.
Speaking. Fair statement. If they thought they could make it, they would make it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Edmund Fitzgerald. Tell us about the ship, when it was built, the dimensions, anything you'd like to tell our listeners.
Sure. She was built in 1958 at the Great Lakes Engineering Works, River Rouge, Michigan. 729 feet long, about 75 foot in beam. Breadth of ship, depth of ship, we came in at about 14 feet. In other words, the distance from the water up to the top of the deck. She was considered to be the biggest vessel, largest vessel on the Great Lakes when launched, and would continue to be so until about 1960 or 1971 or 72 when the big 1,000-footers began coming out. The shipping industry on the Great Lakes has gone through a revolution of about the last 20 or 30 years. They ended up getting rid of many of the smaller ships, the 600-footers that could haul maybe 10,000 ton, and went to 13 great 1,000-foot long vessels that could haul up to 60,000 tons, maybe a little bit more, depending on conditions. So we've got 13 ships that are hauling about 70% of all of the iron ore in the country. And that's critical, obviously, for the country, economic health of the country. But it also means that you've got a limitation on the Soo Canal because there's only one lock at the Soo that can take the big ships. Should anything happen to that lock by accident or by planning, then your ships can be trapped on either side of it. and the ability to deliver iron ore then to the steel mills, where actually iron pellets becomes constrained. So
How long does it?
go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. How long does it take for a ship to go through those locks at the Sioux locks?
It depends how fast they want to go through, but the lockmaster can put you up and down in about 15 minutes.
Okay. Well, the Fitzgerald, what? So, how much was it loaded with? And exactly, in the song, it talks about Duluth. It was really superior. Is that correct? It's the same
Well,
thing.
the song is taken the wrong way by some people. It is not a literal story of the ship. It is factually incorrect in a number of instances. They're not serious because the storm or the ballad was really focused as kind of a focal point for all ships on the Great Lakes, for all shipwrecks that occurred. So many of the phrases that were used in it are more applicable to everybody than just the Fitzgerald. And that has some people really running around with a tight pair of shorts on. That's not right. That can't be. And you see that fight whenever you get people who talk Fitzgerald. That's one of the little fights they have. But she was
Yes.
that night 27,700 tons of taconite pellets coming down from Wisconsin. In other words, they were mined in the upper Minnesota, taken by rail down to Wisconsin and the docks at Superior, and that was the loading facility outbound. That's enough pellets to make about 7,500 automobiles, and that's real cars. That's 1975 cars. That's not the little stuff we're tootling around in now. Different
So,
time.
Fred, yeah. So the Fitzgerald was considered one of the premier ship. To be a captain on that ship was a big deal, correct?
It was a big deal. She was considered to be the pride of the line of the Columbia Transportation Division of Ogilvy Norton. If you were a sailor on the Great Lakes, be you deck officer or be you just a cook, you wanted to be on the Fitzgerald. She was the newest of the boats. She was the best equipped of the boats. She had two sets of owners' quarters on board that were spacious and considered to be almost palatial in nature. If you had a business with a North Carrier, business with one of the companies, you could be given a trip on the boat, up, down, bound trip, stay on for both if you like, as a way of getting a reward for doing business with the company or just for pleasure.
For all the listeners, who is Edmund Fitzgerald? Just so people wonder, who is this person?
Edmund Fitzgerald was the president of the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company of Milwaukee, and the ship was named in his honor. He has no connection with sailing or no connection with the water at all, beyond six, I think, of his uncles were ship captains on the Great Lakes. So he was the oddball that didn't follow the sea, but followed the numbers. So he became an accountant and later the president of the company.
I heard on a podcast just today, Fred, that they had a big meeting when they were going to christen this thing. He says, I have two rules. I want it to be the most exorbitant, palatial boat of all. And secondly, I don't want it named after me. Well, apparently he went to the bathroom. While he was out, they voted 7-0 that the name would be after him. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I heard today.
I can't verify that up and down as I would not follow him into the bathroom, but it sounds like something that could have happened.
Yeah, it's pretty
Well,
funny.
there were supposedly 12,000 people at the launch. And
Yeah, I heard his daughter tried to break the champagne bottle and it didn't. It took 3 or 4 times or something.
as if you believe in this in superstitions of the sea, the Fitzgerald is a good example of that. It was his wife that had the trouble. She had a champagne bottle and she was supposed to hit the bow with it. It was going to break and was going to name the vessel. Very traditional, except she had to hit it 3 times before the champagne bottle would break. That's a bad omen. The second bad omen was that the boat was injured when it was launched. On the Great Lakes, we don't do a slider in stern first, we slider in sideways. So the boat goes off the dock, off the quay, and then goes into a tremendous splash of water that washes across to the other dock, the other boats, etc. One individual was injured when that tidal wave kind of carried him away, and the other one was injured with a heart attack. in the excitement. There were 12,000 people there in the excitement of watching the launch of the big freighter. So again,
Wow.
if you're into this business of sea superstition, she was a good boat to be part of.
That sounds like a Twilight Zone story there, Fred.
Well, I don't whistle that well anymore, but if you can, we'll all hum the tune.
So we're going to jump over to Tom briefly and come back to you, Fred. Tom, the weather. Tell us about the weather on November 14th and November 15th. And I think you have a presentation to show us.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bunch of slides, but I think Fred's covering a lot of the history stuff, so I can go in a minute here and show some of the weather related things. I wasn't exactly sure, which things would need or wouldn't need to be covered, but I'll show that here in a second. But, the thing is, you basically had kind of a 2-day period, November 9th and 10th, during which, the Fitzgerald was traveling across Lake Superior along with the Arthur Anderson. That was initially a little bit ahead of it because it went out of Two Harbors, Minnesota, and the Fitzgerald went out of Superior. Over the course of that next 36 hours or so, the Fitzgerald kind of got ahead of it. And, they sort of experienced all the different facets of the storm because it was lifting up, a typical sort of a Colorado low, so to speak, that we get here in the upper Midwest, where you had a storm system come out of the southern plains, intensifies as it moves northeast, through Iowa and then up across Lake Superior and eventually up toward James Bay there up in Canada. And, so they had the initial sort of strong southeasterly winds that went more northeasterly with time and then even kind of calmed for a period of time as the low traveled across Lake Superior. And then the part that really got them was when the winds turned to the north and northwest on November 10th and especially into the afternoon and evening on that day. And I'll bring up some slides here because basically what we did is what I did, and along with, another forecaster that was with me in Marquette at the time and with a researcher at the Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab in Ann Arbor, we basically looked at things and we're like, well, we have reanalysis data, this data where they rerun models with old data, all the observations they can to get sort of the best estimate of what the atmosphere is doing. It's a fairly coarse resolution, especially back when we did the research in 2005. The reanalysis data is a little bit better now. But we were doing things from a real research mode, which now, we have things like the HER model and all the high resolution models that we have access to now. And the output looks, it's very seductive. We have models that put out reflectivity. It looks like real storms, et cetera. But back in 2005, there was nothing like that really available in terms of operational data, but you could run it in a research mode. And that's essentially what we did, down to about 5 kilometers where we were doing things across the Great Lakes. And then we even dropped in sort of these 1 kilometer nests even over Lake Superior. So I'll kind of jump through a few slides here. Like I said, you kind of said, you can spend 5 or 10 minutes here and I'll give you a quick taste of the weather. And, I'll throw up my slideshow here. I assume you guys are seeing my screen. Are you seeing it there, John?
Yes, sir.
What's that? Yeah, there it is. It's there. Yeah. Bring it on, Tom.
And obviously this stuff, the funny thing was we did the research in 2005, which was the 30th anniversary, and that's kind of what we were doing. I was in the Marquette office, obviously, of the National Weather Service up there. And, it's Lake Superior, so this is a big story up there. And the Marquette office is actually responsible now. It wasn't at the time, but now is responsible for the open waters forecasts on Lake Superior. So we just kind of wanted to take a little closer look. So this was just a quick view of kind of where the two ships that were, in close proximity to one another throughout this event, the Fitzgerald and the Anderson, where they were for the duration of the event, give or take. But the Fitzgerald is sort of highlighted here in red and the ultimate sort of, resting spot, obviously, of the ship and the Anderson at that same time. And the big thing here is you can kind of see just the proximity to Whitefish Bay, which is, for this event or most events, that would be kind of a safe harbor just because the waves, coming in from the north or northwest, it would be sheltered. So that was sort of, you need to get to that point to really, get out of the worst of the conditions. And I'm not going to go in great detail on any of these, but I just kind of wanted to show for those of us old timers, we used to look at our weather maps. This was off of kind of a DIFAX, so to speak, chart at the time. And it just shows that, that area of low pressure here in the upper left, over this period of 24 to 36 hours, moves northeast and, across Lake Superior and eventually up toward James Bay. At the beginning of this, it's around 1,000 millibar low, and by the end, you're down at around 978 millibars. For any of the given synoptic time periods, it didn't quite satisfy the criteria of what we call a bomb of, sort of a millibar per hour for 12 hours. But it did have a time period in which it dropped 11 millibars in 12 hours. And obviously over that whole period, it went down, about 22 millibars. So definitely a rapidly deepening system. And you can see the gradient and the surface pressure on the backside there, really sort of indicative of the high winds you'd have. And I'll kind of skip ahead here and look at just a few other things. And, this was sort of the, at the time, this is before we had the WRF model and some of the other high resolution models that have been run more recently. What we used at the time was the RAMS model. It was a, regional atmospheric modeling system. And we kind of had this big outer domain, just trying to get the synoptic scale, the large scale conditions right. And then we had sort of nested down as you do to higher resolution. So this sort of inset here of the blue is where we were running at 5 kilometers, which, nowadays most of your high resolution runs run at 3 kilometers. But 5 was pretty good for the time in 2005. And then we even dropped in these smaller nests through the run of the simulation that were at 1 kilometer resolution. So, really high resolution to try to get a good sense of what the most likely conditions were, because the problem was observations, at that time were, very limited. You didn't have any buoys in the Great Lakes. This disaster is actually what led to the addition of buoys in Lake Superior and the other Great Lakes. But you had mostly just ship observations and observations along the shore. And just kind of a little fact of trivia, during this whole sort of, say, 42 hours while, things were going on, you had fewer than 1 observation per hour, maybe about 30 observations from the ships over that entire period, for an area that's roughly the size of South Carolina. So, we think of nowadays, imagine if you only got 1 observation, from the state of South Carolina, less than 1 observation per hour. And that's what you're dealing with. So that's why we went back and we tried to model the event to get at least a better idea of what the most likely conditions were. And I'll kind of skip ahead here again, not show you a lot of the details of sort of the synoptic weather. If anybody wants to see, we can go back, but kind of show some of the results from this. And I've kind of labeled these. This is a sort of a 50-meter wind forecast, because what we found was that matched most closely the observations that we did have. And that makes sense because at this time of year in the fall, the weather is getting colder, the temperatures aloft are colder, so you're mixing really well. So you're able to transport a lot of that momentum from aloft, down to the water surface, because the water itself is still relatively, so to speak, warm at that time of year. Average temperatures are around, 7 degrees Celsius in Lake Superior in early November. So this was on the 9th, and the ships left port, left both of their ports, the Fitzgerald a little bit after. And I'm a meteorologist here, so I'm talking UTC or Z time, but you can subtract 5 hours to get Eastern time or 6 hours to get Central time. So this is kind of the afternoon on the 9th. The ships are just out. You can kind of see in the image, I've got these X's on these images, and that shows where the Fitzgerald's best estimate of where it was at those times. And the winds, 20 to 30 knots sustained winds out of the east or east-northeast at that time. You go ahead to, 0 UTC or the early evening hours, the winds have kind of picked up. The surface low is obviously still to the south at this point in time, but you've got, 25 to 30 knots of sustained winds out of the east and the east-northeast. Nothing crazy, but there was a gale warning in effect. That was issued shortly after the Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin, and they were aware of that gale warning. Eventually, that was upgraded to a storm warning, which is for winds above 50 knots. The gale warning is for 35 knot winds. So you can see it's heading out there. And then by, a little bit after, around midnight Central time, a little bit after midnight Eastern time here, winds have picked up further out of the northeast, sustained winds, above 30 knots. Pretty good fetch there. So they, would have been feeling, and I'll show some of the wave simulation output, which is what the folks at the Great Lakes Research Lab helped do the wave modeling for us. So here's that same time. So you can see even at this point in time, you've got waves simulated or estimated to be over 3 meters. So, above 15 feet at that time, even with just sort of, I'd say the fairly benign conditions. And this is something they would have expected. One thing, I should mention is both the Fitzgerald and the Anderson communicated. And with this sort of gale eventually expected to develop out of the north, they took a bit of a more northern route. They, kind of see they're a little bit close to Isle Royale here. And the main idea of that is you're a little bit in the lee shore of Canada. So the highest waves would be south especially as they go around to the north, or the expectation of that later on. Nowadays, with the forecast being improved, the ships basically take the shortest course they can in most cases, and they would go just north of the Keweenaw Peninsula there in Michigan. But we jump ahead here to 12 UTC around 6 a.m. That morning on November 10th. And this is when you can kind of see with the vectors here and the wind, giving you a sense of the wind direction. The surface low is essentially over Lake Superior at this time. And the winds have kind of calmed down. A little bit of a lull, so to speak, as the low passes across Lake Superior. The waves, they lag the winds. Obviously, there's a little bit of a delay between the peak winds and the peak waves. So you still have some waves that are, pretty significant over 3 meters, over 15 to 16 feet there, even in the early morning. You jump ahead to mid-morning around 9 a.m. And the Fitzgerald then is, you can kind of see it's off to the west-northwest of Michipicoten Island there in Lake Superior, and not any real winds of consequence at that time. But then you jump ahead a little bit farther by midday, and this is where the low is passed to the north of the lake, and you can see the winds are starting to come around to the north and the northwest, and you can see over western Lake Superior even more of a west-northwest, at least somewhat there. And this is a little different perhaps than what their expectations were. They were, I think, expecting more of a northerly direction. Maybe the low they were expecting to pass a little bit farther to the east, with 1970s forecasting. But the main things I want to point out here is you can see kind of two cores of higher winds starting to develop, one north of the Keweenaw Peninsula and another one north of what's known as the Huron Mountains in the Upper Peninsula there. And part of that is sort of this frictional convergence you get where there's higher terrain in both of those areas. So you tend to get higher winds that kind of develop in those areas. The waves, you can also see, are starting to really pick up in that southeastern part of Lake Superior at that point. You've got waves of over 3.5 meters starting to show up there, so 15 to 20 feet. And the Fitzgerald at this point in time isn't feeling those, but they're to the south in the direction that it's going to be traveling, obviously. And now things are really going downhill in a hurry. And you can see how fast this is happening. This is by mid-afternoon on November 10th. You've got a core of greater than 40 knots sustained winds coming in across the central part of Lake Superior. And then this area of greater than 45 knots sustained winds north of the Huron Mountains, north of Munising, and sort of heading toward Grand Marais and Whitefish Point there. And the big thing here to note is, here the Fitzgerald there with that sort of blue X is trying to head south-southeast toward Whitefish Bay. And that's sort of at the end of that fetch of those strongest winds. And the highest waves are going to be generated over the course of those winds, and the highest waves will be at the end of that fetch. So this is those wave heights that were simulated that mid-afternoon around 3 p.m. And now you can see over 5.5 meters in area south of the Fitzgerald. The Fitzgerald seeing around 5-meter winds, so 15 to 20 foot waves, when it's kind of in the area of Caribou Island and Caribou Shoals, where there's some, it's not quite, the water isn't quite as deep there. It's definitely an area where you can run into some trouble if if the ship runs aground at all in any way, shape, or form. And, our research wasn't to get into a lot of the theories as to what led to the sinking. There's a lot of different ideas, but it was mainly just to give an idea what the weather was. And these are not, good conditions, and they're not conditions you'd want to be experiencing traveling through that area. The other key thing here is if you look at the wave direction, they're west to east, looking at those arrows, those vectors, and this ship is traveling south-southeast. So you can understand here, it's not hitting, it doesn't have a bow wave or a stern wave. These are basically hitting it, at an almost a 90-degree angle to the direction it's traveling, which is obviously not what you would want. If anybody here has ever been cruising, definitely not the conditions you want. So this is 6 p.m. This is shortly before the Fitzgerald is, thought to have gone down around probably 0:15 UTC, 0:20, based on, sort of when its last radio communications occurred with the Anderson. And you have a huge area of greater than 45 knot sustained winds, gusts, hurricane force. Fitzgerald is right at the eastern edge of those highest winds, and the waves now are simulated to be over 7 meters. So so over 22 to 26 feet in that area. And then if you jump ahead one more hour in the simulations, you couldn't, have a worse thing. The highest waves from the simulations were basically about 7.8 meters. And that's significant wave height, which is basically the average of the upper tercile or the upper third of wave heights. But waves are a spectrum, and they sort of follow a Rayleigh distribution, which means, at least theoretically, any individual wave could be at a maximum of around 14 meters, which is, crazy. 14 to 15 meters. You could have an individual wave of 45 feet. Give or take. But the actual significant wave heights, the waves that we would definitely have been experiencing, frequently, were on the order of 26 feet or, 7.5 to 7.8 meters, right around when the time it went down. So if there was anything going on, there's, discussions obviously where the ship may have already been low in the water, taking on water, et cetera. Just the bottom line here is it couldn't have been experiencing worse conditions at a worse time in its effort to get to Whitefish Bay here, where you can see how rapidly the wave heights drop off down, below 4 and even down to about 3 meters as you get into the bay. And then I'll just show two more quick reel here. By midnight, essentially, just a few hours later, 5 hours later than that last image, the winds have calmed down, just, more gale force versus storm force at this point. And the wave heights have dropped as well. They're down below, around 5 meters. Still nothing I'd want to be out in, but it gives you that sense of, how quickly things ramped up and how quickly things calmed down. And it just was an unfortunate being in sort of the worst place at the worst time. And I'll touch on just the rarity climatologically of the event here. You can kind of see waves of over 7 meters. This is based on U.S. Army Corps of Engineers work, where they did some hindcast simulations, basically occur less than 0.1% of the time. And when they do occur, they can occur from the northeast and northwest, but predominantly the wave direction with that greater than 7 meter waves be more out of the north. Whereas these were definitely more coming from the northwest or even the west northwest, which was obviously very unfortunate with what we were seeing, their direction of travel and those waves being sort of perpendicular to the course of the ship. So, that's sort of a quick summary, so to speak, of the conditions that it was exposed to while it was out there.
Okay, so where did the forecast come out of? You said Marquette had that. Now, who used to do that?
At the time, the Great Lakes, the forecasts all came out of the Chicago office.
Okay. And are we certain they got the weather forecast initially? I mean, how did that, Fred, do you know how they got the information to the ships? How did they receive this?
It was faxed to the ship. The ship asked for it, it would be faxed. For example, Dudley Paquette, who was the Sykes captain and the third ship in the world of Fitz and Anderson, always did his own. He got the fax material, he got the raw data from the WeatherBrains guys, and literally did his own forecasting. Famous for it.
Okay.
It works, I guess. At least it did in this instance.
So we're on the. Go ahead, Fred.
I just wanted to say that I work at the Maritime Museum in Marquette, and periodically we'll have the folks, or rather the Weather Bureau techs from the station come in and do a Fitzgerald presentation of what the weather was like during the storm. And we'll do that about every second year, maybe. Matt Sykes has been doing much of that. Of course, Matt's gone now. But,
Matt Zika?
Zika, yeah.
Yeah.
So, we're able to capitalize by getting you guys to come in and talk to real people and get their eyes really opened up with weather and certainly closer to the Fitzgerald storm.
Yeah. So let's talk about weather. So Troy will giggle here. How much weather computer model information do they have, Tom, in 1975? What did they have?
At that time, I think you would have been at the beginning stages of the LFM, the limited fine mesh model. And, resolution, I think, was over 100 kilometers, how far apart each point is in the output that you receive. So not much. I mean, you had some basic model information, but a lot of it was looking at the analyses and using your experience to project out, where
Frog
things
it out.
Yeah. Absolutely. I would not disagree with that.
Yeah. James or Troy, the guys have been doing it a long time. Any comments what it was like in 1975?
I find how rare this is. What Tom is talking about, how rare it is, just amazing. And I think that chart sort of said it all. But and I've never been through this. I haven't really looked at this much, and I'm very interested in what Tom and what Fred had to say about it. And I think back in the day, because unfortunately James and I mean, I wasn't quite there yet, but I mean, this is the beginning of our careers. So we do remember what it was like back then, days of WSOs, the local weather service office that mainly were Met techs working there. And then you had the WSFOs. And I assume I know the WSFO, or at least the big one, was in Chicago. So that's, as Tom pointed out, but it's amazing how things have changed.
I wonder what the forecast looked like 3 days before it happened. I mean, how far in advance did they flag this thing?
Yeah.
That LFM was nasty.
Yeah, but I guess my question is,
it was issued actually shortly after the Fitzgerald had left port, before the Anderson and some of the other ships did, but certainly not a ton of lead time, mind you. But it is rare, the frequency isn't a lot, but if you look at it from a return period, those conditions on Lake Superior occur roughly every 2 years.
Okay.
So it's rare in terms of a ship being out there but it happens we get pretty good fall storms in the Great Lakes, every few years. And it's just it's a real issue with the stability. The lake is kind of at its still warm, at least in a relative sense. That cold air is coming in, and that's a big player too, because if you think of it from a density perspective, the water is a little less dense than when it's real cold, and that air is real dense. So it's also more successful at building the big waves, whereas the spring is the opposite. If you want those calmer conditions on the lakes, you go out in the spring, although you'll be subject to a lot of fog. But you can get, the waves aren't.
We have a new game we play too.
Yeah.
Pull the cell phone out of your pocket. We go to marinetraffic.com, call that up. And when the storms are blowing, you're able to watch it all happen. And you'll see the line of ships either running north shore or south shore, depending on weather, or tucked in somewhere on anchor. But you will see a couple of them out in the middle, taking the direct route coming down from Thunder Bay, for example. And when you determine what that ship is, it's invariably a saltwater vessel that has made a poor decision.
Yeah.
Or riding it.
Yeah.
I've got a quick question for Tom and for Fred real quick, because I noticed this past, Tom, in your slides that you had up, the BAMs in 2004, that reanalysis. Do you remember what month that was? I want to go back and pull that article out of BAMs.
Well, that article was our article. It was from 2006. It was May 2006.
Okay, May 2006 in BAMs. Okay. And one more question before I leave it completely. Looking back at it, just the summary statement, based on where that low moved across Lake Superior, what was the verification like, or was there such, my question, there may not have been such thing as verification back in those days, but I was just wondering if it verified at all with what WSFO Chicago was tending to think. Obviously, it was developing very quickly because they ramped up the warnings for Lake Superior very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, for the time, that would have been considered a fairly good forecast, and that they had a gale warning out before the gale conditions developed, and a storm warning kind of coincident with some of those conditions. But it's It's kind of like issuing back in the day when I issued severe thunderstorm warnings in my early career. You usually didn't do it till you got a report of something. It just kind of, unfortunately, with the limits that you had.
Yep. And a lot of times those, as you know, Tom, those warnings that went out on teletype, by the way, in those days, and had to go the RAWARC, and all this stuff was 65 or at the most 65 words a minute. You had the form, the severe thunderstorm, 3-part form you had to fill out, and then you had to type it on a teletype. So chances are, by the time the warning went out, the storm already moved 10 or 15 miles. Because I remember that at WSO Austin, same thing. But good points. Thank you.
Good one.
This context to like what was a good forecast then is so essential, and I want to dig into that a little bit more too. You'd mentioned that there were some alerts, warnings going, as they were going out, and yes, it became a very rare event while they were out there. But at the time that they received those warnings, how uncommon was it to get a gale warning? When you're out there, you don't expect every warned storm to be like a generational storm, right? You just getting a warning. They probably had sailed through a whole bunch of these, right, Fred and Tom?
Yeah, Fred probably can speak to that, knowing the history about the shipping more than I do.
Yeah.
They're not going to hold it off because the gale's coming. At least they weren't then.
So this leads me to my second question, which is what you showed, Tom, was a succession of information coming in over time. So they had the warnings, but they could have theoretically gotten some wave information. I guess I'm guessing here. Could they have gotten more information as they were going about the deteriorating conditions, and if forecasters were updating their thoughts about, oh, this low is really deepening, and these waves are going to be in that upper third of the distribution of what we expect this to look like. Yes, they might have had a whole lot as they were starting the progression, but you see this period where before they dip down and really make for Whitefish Bay, they could have theoretically stopped and held off and been okay. Along the journey, there are decision points.
The only communication equipment they had were 3 FMs and a 2182 kilocycle, which was even old then, AM radio. So that would have been the methodology of communicating with anybody.
Okay, so they don't get any updated weather information as they're going along.
And there's no observations. There's no buoys at the time. The only wave height observations are from the ships themselves, and those are obviously estimates. So it really is kind of a lack of information, and it's a lot of experience of knowing. Well, I've sailed in countless gale events, or numerous, and timing as well, and they perhaps felt comfortable in thinking they could still beat sort of the worst conditions when things turn around. But it's all conjecture at this point, and it's the way we kind of phrased it was now with the information folks have, they can go out and they can avoid the worst conditions, whereas in the past they sort of had to endure. And there's pressure, obviously on the shipping companies, and you've got to make your times, you've got to make your deliveries, and you're making your best guess judgment in terms of, can we make this? Because we don't want to be late. We've got to,
ships do not make money sitting at a dock.
Exactly.
They got to be moving,
right.
And that's the way the business is. The trick is to be moving when it's safe and not when it isn't.
It is just so important. I think looking back on this, it's so easy to see, through the lenses of today. We have all this information at our fingertips. And like you said, if all you've got is AM, FM radio and whatever the other piece of technology was, I'm sorry not to be familiar with it. But it sounds like you don't get a whole lot. You really are going out and you're relying on your experience. And
you've got to remember that whatever we've done has been right, because we've had 5 years with nothing. I mean, we've not had a shipwreck or a major incident in 5 years, 50 years, quite literally from
50
that.
years. Yeah, 50 years, right.
50 years. I'll do the math.
No, I know what you meant.
It's worked. So they're using what you guys are giving them, and they're making effective use of it.
Yeah, a good example of that is in November of 1998, same November 10th.
Yep.
I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan at that time, which also
same exact storm.
And you had a very similar track, a very similar, surface low pressure, all those things. And the forecasts were obviously so much, even in 1998, vastly improved, and you didn't have a disaster. And, in that event, we had buoys out there, and on Lake Michigan, you had 25-foot waves, and that buoy's in the middle of Lake Michigan, which isn't even the full fetch of the entire width of the lake with the west and northwest winds. But the forecasts were, dramatically improved. At that time, in the late 90s, we probably had the ADA model in the GFS, or it would have been the AVN, but even those were, so much more improved from what they had back in the 70s that you like Fred pointed out, you didn't have a disaster occur because the ships were able to sort of stay harbored.
Let me give a little ounce of perspective to that. A friend of mine was a captain in one of the freighters. And about 5 years ago, he gave me a call one night and said, "Fred, we're almost up to Escanaba." Okay, where you coming from? We came out of Chicago. I'm going to load at the CNN docks there. And I said, "Well, where exactly are you?" And he said, "Two McDonald's." I said, "What do you mean by two McDonald's?" Well, his the wind gauge that was on the pilot house, the dash, I guess I'll call it, was registering 95 miles an hour. He was hugging the shore of Lake Michigan so tightly that as they went past the vents, past the little towns, they could see McDonald's as their identification point, and then went on to another one. And that's the way they were navigating, by God and McDonald's. But that's it.
Yeah. So Kim, I know this is hard for you. I mean, you're about 21 or you're 22, but back in the day, we had nothing. We had nothing. We had one model. I mean, James, Troy, Rick, I mean, we had fax charts and we took observations. We tried to take the conditions today and try to prog this out. Am I right, James? We had nothing.
MRF, the old LFM and the MRF. It was rough. I mean, it was rough. And so I don't think people understand how hard it was and what of a challenge it was back in those days. Goodness gracious.
I don't know how we did it, really, looking back now.
We had nothing.
Yeah. And the communication, we didn't have the communication that we have now, back in those days. That's what got me into this was my ham radio license. I volunteered as a spotter because I could communicate, and we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, cell phones, none of this stuff. And reaching people, it was very hard to do, reaching, public service agencies. And it was tough back in those days. It really was.
When somebody asked me to describe my career, I feel like the Jetsons. When I was a little boy, I loved the Jetsons, right? The Jetsons. We are in the Jetsons now. It's coming. You will see George Jetson and his dog Astro, okay? Back then, we had nothing. I mean, we had to put out a statewide forecast with one model and limited observations. I mean, it's stunning to me. So, Fred, I was corresponding with several Laker captains, and one in particular said, "John, everything changed with the Fitz. We have not lost a ship in 50 years. When prior to the Fitz, sinking was very common. 9 years earlier, we lost the Daniel Morrell, sank on Lake Huron with only one survival. 8 years before that, the Carl Bradley on Lake Michigan. It was common to have shipwrecks all the time."
Yeah.
He said, right, Fred? Things have really...
Absolutely. I mean, I can name 5 more that should be on the list. That was the way things worked.
So let's talk a little bit more about the Fitz. So on Tom, thanks for the great weather presentation and keep jumping in. So the 14th, it loads, it starts going. What do you want to say on the 14th of significance, Fred? You wrote the definitive book. What would you like to say?
All day long I've been talking Fitzgerald. I've probably gone through, 8 or 9 interviews, and I'm getting a little fitzed out. But
show title.
Show title.
It is
show title, no doubt.
It's part of who people are on the Great Lakes. The Fitzgerald has a large part of that, and it is something that for many people. Well, it's strange. we still have a clutch of people that are trying to solve the mystery of how it sunk, and they're going to do it one way or another. Or, I mean, there's 8 or 9 different theories, any one of which could be plausible, but that's their thing. And that train left the station 50 years ago. You know, our focus now has been on fixing the problem of the Fitzgerald so it doesn't happen again. So we don't have that same disaster that we had. And that has been working out very well, I think. You can always complain about this, that, or the other thing, but by and large, all those things are working pretty good. The problem is we're losing ships. Scrapped out, retirement. I mean, the average age of a Laker now is 50 years. That's a new boat. 50 years is a pretty new boat. Fitzgerald was 17 when she sank, but of course that was an odd situation. When the Morel went down, she was built 1902, I think, or 03. Carl D. Bradley was 1925. Our shipyards are no longer our shipyards. They're not building anything. The Canadians are buying their boats from China. Think of that. This is one of the world's great maritime nations, and they can't build their own bloody lake cruiser, Laker. They have to come from Canada, and they've got 24 either on order or finished. So,
And Fred, this is something I was hoping you could talk about too. Talk about the significance of this to the people of the Great Lakes, because this industry base, and I mean, everything from building the ships to running the ships and everything that they were carrying, this was a big piece of life for people living along the coast. So they weren't just doing this for fun, right? This was their industry base. Can you talk a little bit about what the impact of this was on the people after it happened?
I'm trying to think of the way to do that, because obviously you have the family group, which is extraordinarily active, and I don't want to say pushy, but this was their tragedy that was played out. This wasn't anybody else's tragedy, and they take real ownership of that. But otherwise, a lot of the folks that are in the Great Lakes let the shipwrecks just kind of let the Fitzgerald and the other freighters long gone. Well, this country gets 92% or 95% of all of its products by sea. It doesn't fly in, it comes by sea. One way or another, it's coming in by sea. And the same thing is true for the Great Lakes, to a somewhat lesser degree. But like the oceans, we ignore it. Like the lakes, we generally ignore it unless you have some connection with it. If you know somebody working on a ship, you have a relationship. If you like the genre of being a Great Lakes boat nerd, and sitting on the bank of the St. Mary's River and waving at the boats as they go by and getting captain's salutes, et cetera, then that's a different story. You now have a hobby that's transferred itself into an activity. But other than that, for the average person, they really don't get it. They don't see that relationship. But again, that's also true nationally, I think, in terms of how we treated our own maritime, our own marine, which doesn't exist anymore for practical purposes.
I'd like to know more about the 29 men. Captain McSorley, what do we know about him?
We know an
What's his
awful lot
story?
about those guys, and some of the writers, some of the historians that have been working with it have worked entirely within family groups. And it's been a difficult thing for them because every year they've got to drag this back out again. Their relationship to the Fitzgerald, yes, it was my uncle, and you've got to say something nice about it. Some folks are anxious to do that, some are not. So you're dealing with the variety of people that we have anywhere. We know
What do we know
McSorley.
about Captain McSorley? Do you know anything about him?
We know he was a very competent officer. We know he was considered to be an excellent officer. No one has spoken negatively of him, other than the fact that he was also considered to be a driver. In other words, he would get the ship going, he would buck it out, he was heavy weather captain. That's what he did, but he was also a superb ship handler. Part of his accolades. Supposedly this was his last trip. His wife had been ill, and finally she had recovered enough that he could retire and they could do something together as a couple again. So he was finishing his run on the Fitzgerald. And that's probably a synopsis of Ernest McSorley.
And it looks like from the numbers here, he was 63. So apparently he was very experienced. Surely this wasn't his first storm.
Not at all. Highly experienced. He had come up through the hawse pipe. In other words, he didn't go through a maritime academy. He rather came up through the deck. Started off as an not able seaman. Started off as an oiler, I think, and worked his way up to being the captain of the vessel, the biggest vessel on the Great Lakes. One of the little tricks he would play would take a cassette recording of a steam calliope, and he'd play that over the ship's speakers as they went through close to land, up a river or in a dock. And then he would make public comments if he saw anybody along the shore that was waving at them or something. He'd boom it down, stand by for your salute. And then he'd blow the steam whistles again to give a captain's salute. He was a character, well liked.
And from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, his last communication was, "We are holding our own." Is that true?
That is reportedly what he said. Not
And
doubting
this was
it, but
about what? About how long was that before the wreck came?
that was it. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been 2 minutes. If he was taking water through the main hatchways, if the hatchway collapsed, then he was going down right now. This is a right now moment. This is not anything you think about. You don't worry about lifeboats. You haven't got the time. The crew hasn't got time to put on a life jacket, and that's not going to save him anyway. So my suspicion would be that most of the crew on that ship knew exactly what was happening. And they also knew their chances of survival were minimal, and the Coast Guard wasn't coming. Real world.
And was there any distress signals sent out? Do we know of?
No.
And how long
Fred,
did it
did you?
take? Yeah, go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, Fred. Did you ever talk to Bernie Cooper, the captain of the Anderson?
Yes.
Do you have any comments about those conversations?
I would, yeah. Let me think just for, yes. Bernie was a superb ship handler and a superb captain. He babysat Fitzgerald, for example, during those last several hours of running. He was certainly a very competent and good captain. My conversations were with him about what he did in the pilot house, what his thoughts were, what his experiences were in the lakes. He reported, for example, to me over drinks at a party that he believed that he had 40-foot waves come over his stern. He had been running behind Fitzgerald. He was overtaken by a wave. We call them three sisters on the lakes, but the rogue wave would probably fit the same phenomena. Came over the stern of the ship, was big enough to be able to break on the pilot house, not the pilot house, the stern castle. There's two lifeboats up there. One of the lifeboats was broken open in terms of the strong back, which is the support structure sitting on top of the boat with the canvas on top of it. It blew right through that. He said, "Fred, I know it was 40 feet because that's how the distance from my deck to the top of that stern castle. So that's what I saw." He said, "I had two more big ones very similar to that within the next 5 or 6 minutes." He said, "I believe those waves bunched up, continued after me, passed me by, and struck the Fitzgerald downbound." That's what he believed was the coup de grace given to the Fitzgerald. Maybe, maybe not. When we talked about the Fitzgerald trying to get in behind anchor and the Anderson too into Whitefish Bay, when Anderson went in and put the anchor down at Whitefish Bay, of course, the situation with Fitzgerald, was she, wasn't she, where was she, was very much open. Nobody knew anything about the ship. The Coast Guard wasn't coming out. They didn't have the vessels that would work. They both Mackinac and the Sundew were broken, undergoing heavy maintenance down in Sheboygan, I believe. So the captain of the port, group commander, called Cooper directly and asked him to go out. He had asked every boat that was anchored there to go out. And Cooper responded to him that, "Look, you are ordering me. You're not ordering me. Give me an order, and that's different than ask me." Because remember, that captain, Cooper, is responsible for three things. He's responsible for his men and crew, his vessel, and responsible for both to his owners. He's not a rescue boat. He doesn't have that training. He doesn't have that capability. That's not my role in this kerfuffle. But what he did do was bring the troops in, bring his crew into the mess deck and talk to them and tell them this is the request I had from the Coast Guard. I can do that. We can do that, but only if you guys want to do that. They agreed to go out. They were in support of the decision made to go out, except for one young cook, one young assistant that came into the pilot house briefly and spoke with Cooper and said, in effect, are we really going out? And the Cooper said, yes, we are. The youngster said, well, hold a minute. I'll be right back. 5 or 6 minutes later, he comes back with a cassette in a mayonnaise jar with the rim of the jar wrapped in masking tape. And he hands it to the captain. And he says, sir, if anything happens, if we're going over, would you throw this overboard for me? It's for my wife. It's my last testament, my will. And Coop, a little shocked, says, sure, happy to do it. But that was the scene, if you will. That was the mood. That was the pressure these guys were on to go back out, to do it. I mean, this was not an easy decision made nor done. And they did it. They didn't find anything. They got out by the next morning. As you indicated, the weather had largely gone down significantly. And then the other vessels that were there came out. But Anderson went ahead and did what they saw they should do.
So they went out the next morning, not that night, correct?
Not that night. Well, they left that night. Anderson left that night, but by next morning, of course, we knew it was dropping down.
I'm sorry, James, go ahead. I didn't mean to jump in there.
No, I was going to ask about the search and rescue process. What was that like?
No good. The Coast
What do you
Guard
mean by that?
Well, the Coast Guard had nothing capable of going out. All the Coast Guard small boats would not have survived the storm. So the 40-footers of the 44 rescue boats certainly were overwhelmed by the weather that night. They weren't designed to operate under in those conditions. There was a Coast Guard tug stationed at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, that was broken. And didn't make much difference, I guess. Anyway, she was under heavy weather restriction not to go out in conditions of greater than 60 knots, so she would capsize. The big icebreaker Mackinac was down lakes and under repair. She was not available. One of the buoy tenders, the Sundew, was with her. She also was down lakes and under repair. Both of those vessels would have withstood the seas that night. And I'll say rescue becomes almost a hope rather than something that you easily do. But capable of going out and rendering what aid she might have been capable of, they simply weren't available to go. That was a command decision made that was stupid in the extreme. If you're on the Great Lakes, you know extremely when you're going to hit extremely. You know when you're going to have bad weather. It's going to be fall. It's probably going to be in November if anything happens. That's when you stack up your operational assets, not some other time of the year. That was a Coast Guard decision. When Cooper called this station, Sault Ste. Marie group, Station Group Sioux, reporting that he could no longer seek Fitzgerald, he couldn't find her out there, or can we get a search effort going? The watchstander, the fellow at the Coast Guard station, would not talk to him about it, but only tell him to watch out for a missing 16-foot rowboat. Cooper, to his credit, keeps his cool and eventually works his way through that level of bureaucracy to get the Coast Guard to make the call to start the rescue, which is the Rescue and Coordination Center out of Cleveland, Ohio. They get a C-130 up there looking around. They get a Canadian C-130, a Michigan National Guard C-130. They had a HU-16 amphibious aircraft in Traverse City that couldn't take off that night because they couldn't find the night flares. You have to have night flares in the aircraft to, again, it really lights the scene up and assists everybody, but you got to have them to make it work. That didn't happen. They had a helicopter ready that finally made it up to the search area the following day, HH-52 Sea Stallion. They had actually called and ordered from K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base, which was just south of Marquette, both of the rescue helicopters that were stationed there, Air Force, to also participate in the search. Now, these are, I don't know how much you know about airframes, but these are Hueys with the dual turbine engines. They were designed for rescue work over land, not necessarily over water. They were both ramped up to go that night. I mean, again, you guys understand the weather conditions they would have been facing. And they said, we ain't going until tomorrow morning. So they held them off until the following morning, then sent them up to the north shore of Lake Superior to search. And while they did find some flotsam, that was about it. Nothing of any real significance. But I'll put them down as being heroes for doing it. That took real guts to be able to go out into those conditions. So that's
when did they declare that there were no survivors? When was that made public?
A couple days.
Hmm. And what was the notification process for the next of kin, for the survivors, the wives and the sons and the daughters? How did that go?
That's up to the company.
Do we know anything about it? Was
No.
it done properly?
In my view, no. It was over the radio. It was over the television set. It was extraordinarily mismanaged in terms of letting people know what had happened.
Goodness
There was
gracious.
no officer in charge of it. There was no agency in charge of it. I've served as a notification next of kin officer when I was on active duty, and there's a process and procedure that's followed to assure that you're getting the word to the right people without spreading it around the neighborhood, if that makes sense. But there's a process. That process was mother to daughter. Tell mom, she'll tell the daughter. And they both may be, well into their years. It's just badly run, disorganized.
Wow.
I mean, the legal fighting would come later between the ship's owners and what they were going to pay out to the crew versus what the insurance companies were going to pay, if anything. That became a battle that went on for a couple of years. They all ended up with non-disclosure agreements anyway. Wasn't much.
So, and we've got to take a break in a second, but I've got to ask about the song. So how did Gordon Lightfoot, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, do you know, Fred, about how he heard of this and who wrote the song and how that whole process worked?
He was supposedly up in northern Ontario on a hunting trip or a fishing trip, and the word of the sinking had come via normal media. He had a newspaper story. And from that, he began to think this needs a song. And that process went on for several months as he wrote the song and had it accepted and played it with his band and tried to find the good parts and the bad parts, crafting it together into a song. I don't believe there was any intention for the song to be focused only on Fitzgerald. I think it was really something that went wider in terms of being representative of all of the shipwrecks that lost on the Great Lakes and a way of honoring their crews.
So how would you review the song, Fred, with your knowledge of this whole episode? Rate the song, its level of accuracy.
It's number one. It's number one because it's 50 years later and we're still humming it. It's still there.
And John, for people that are not watching, explain what you do. You have to remember, a lot of people are listening; they can't see.
Yeah, so one of my former students, Fred, I'm upset. I worked midnight shifts for 35 years, and every midnight shift, we start off with the Edmund Fitzgerald. So one of my students put together the words about the big lake they call Gitche Gumee. And she wrote the whole thing out and put it on a bunch of C frame, and I carried that in my office. And the Fitzgerald, I'll tell you this, Fred, at the Great Lakes Museum, when I saw the bell and I read that there were 54 fatherless children, I just broke down and was bawling. Okay, so even though I like the story, I don't like what happened. I don't like so much the Coast Guard failed them. A lot of people, the weather forecast, but let's not forget there were 54 fatherless children from this terrible tragedy.
Yes. Switching gears is also a symphonic, what would you call changing the song for a symphony? Adaption, I guess. They adapted it for a symphony to play, also for a heavy rock band, heavy metal band, drum and bugle corps. I think the Scots have done something with bagpipes with it too. So it's been well accepted in that regard as something that we can use for good or bad, I guess. But that's
Fred, can you just
this
promote
thing.
the museum a little, or the ship up at Whitefish Bay? You want to promote the museum a little bit, real quick before I go to break?
I will, well, yes. If you have an opportunity, you have to see the Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point. It is an extraordinary location. It is something that is, the venue becomes a museum. You're sitting there in this area where all this history occurred, the shipwreck coast, the Fitzgerald, the early Indian versus European engagements occurred there. The history of this continent was written up at Whitefish Point, St. Mary's River, and that eastern area of Lake Superior. So, got to see it. You got to see the bell too, because that is again the touchstone for the whole Fitzgerald. I don't say cult, but certainly every year ringing the bell 29 times, not only at Whitefish Point, also being done at Split Rock Light in Minnesota. Theirs was today. There's another one, I think, in Ashland that went on today. Ashland or Bayfield, I think, did it. We've periodically done them in Marquette. It's a way of, again, thinking of people and of the past and what could be.
So I've got to ask, is the Maritime Sailors Cathedral a musty old hall?
It depends whose must you like. That let Father Engels, who was the rector there, in some state of irritation. He didn't like it that his church was called a musty old hall, but he was a central character, central player to the entire Fitzgerald song. He was the one that rang the bell. He was the one that organized it for 20 years. Every Sunday nearest the 10 November. They don't do it anymore. They now do a single service for all shipwrecks. But in the original ones, they would have the back of the altar lined with old ship's captains. Some guys still from World War II with all their piping, all the gold braid, all the medals on them. They would have a model of the ship on the altar. They would have the bell would be there. There would be special people selected to ring the bell when you were finished with the service. And if you weren't there 2 hours early, you didn't get a seat. That was the popularity of the service. But afterwards, the ladies of the church would serve cookies, coffee, and tea from the silver service of the church. Interesting place, interesting history to it. A lot of it isn't really germane to what we're doing here, but do a little digging around in the internet and you'll find some fascinating things.
Fred, I have one other question, and I apologize if I have missed something from you or Tom on this, but what's the story on the recovery of the bell? How was that done, and when was that done?
That was done in July of 1995.
Okay.
The family members, of course, have been peeved about the Canadians that declared it a graveyard, which the Canadian government did prior to almost anything very rapidly, and the prohibition placed on diving. So they were very sensitive to that area. But they also had nothing that was closure for themselves. They didn't have a body recovered. They didn't have a headstone in the graveyard. They had nothing. So the thought was, and the belief by the family members that asked for it, was could the bell be recovered? Because the bell is often seen as being the soul of a ship. And that would be our touchstone that would help give us closure. That was agreed to by both companies. The ship was still owned by Ogilvy Norton. They hadn't settled out the insurance yet. And I think the insurance companies themselves had a piece of it until it finally got straight. And then the Canadian government, of course, had a say in it because it was in Canadian waters. So they got the administration done. They were able to convince a deep diving suit company known as Newton Suit. In effect, the big armored diving suits is what they build. They can go thousands of feet down. They brought up a Newt suit. They got the boat going. I was not there for that on the boat. I met the boat when it unloaded on shore. But they did it in about 2 dives. Canadian government contributed a submarine tender, HCMS Comoran, and one of their submersibles. So the Canadian government was also involved in the process. The actual lifting of the bell took just several hours on bolt it quite literally, lift it to the back of Comoran, bring it into the cold or the carbide dock in the Sioux, where it was placed ashore, and they did another bell ringing ceremony using the bell directly off the boat. And that also had family members that were lined up to ring for their family member. That's the story of getting the bell up and down. The next step with the bell was to get it to Michigan State University for a complete restoration, which was done, and it was wonderful, except it looked just like it did when it went in the water. So the restoration of it was not what people expected. They didn't want this gray, dingy, dirty thing. They wanted a bright, shiny bell. So somehow, mysteriously, the bell ended up at a automobile shop in Paradise, Michigan, where the owner sandblasted the bell to clean it up, and then took the latex, kind of a plasticized clear plate lacquer you'll use for finishing wood sometimes, and covered it with that. So the bell, when you see it, it gleams. It looks like it should look. This is something that's really there to impress the family member, not necessarily anything else, and not to be preserved as a preservationist would do it. So that's the back channel story on the bell.
Fred, thank you so much.
So Fred, we've got to take a break, and you've promised us an hour. You've given us 90 minutes, and I know you're all fitzed out, as you've told us. So you've had a long day today. Do you want to plug your book? Just anything you need to plug, go ahead. This is your chance. The floor belongs to you.
I've got to finish the story on the bell.
Okay, we'll
Okay,
go.
here's the story on the bell finish. The bell goes ashore and is set up for the bell ringing at the Sioux. I was on board Qumran in the wardroom with the Canadian officers. Now, Canada at the time still had booze on board. So you had a wardroom for the officers to use as a bar. You had a bell on the wall that was used to start the drinking hours, and ding the bell and double dings, I think, turn the switch off, so to speak. So we were all in there for a service of some type relating to the bell, and I don't, this big bell, and I don't remember why, but as the service ended and the officer in charge, the XO, indicated, okay, that's drinks down, we're finished, the bell rang. The little bell. It's 4 feet away from me on the wall, on the bulkhead. I'm looking at this, and it literally struck. And you say, oh, I mean, that's supernatural. It's strange. It makes no sense, but I figured it's a good story. So you got my story on the bell striking.
That is a great story. Wow.
Yeah.
The bell hit.
Incredible. Wow.
Well,
Fred, thank you.
I've bored you long enough. Thank you for letting me intrude on your
Fred, do you want to promote your books, your website? Promote anything you want.
Please promote.
I will show it to you, I guess, but I don't sell them.
We can't see you, Fred, so I don't know what you can show us.
I don't know. I don't sell it. Again, they have bookstores that do that. And that one is available through Avery Color Studios, which is the publisher. But other than that, gentlemen, ladies, I'm here. See you next one.
Okay.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Tom, hang on if you can hang on here, because we got to do picks of the week. Tom's an old weather dweeb. We know he's got a good pick, so hang tight. We're going to come right back after Tony Rice and the astronomy report. We've got Jen, and This Week in Tornado History. We'll come back with picks of the week and more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Yes.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
This December marks the 5-year anniversary of the collapse of the National Science Foundation's massive radio telescope in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. Built in a natural sinkhole on a hilltop in the Caribbean island, it was the world's largest single aperture telescope for 53 years, until it was surpassed in 2016 by a similar but larger radio telescope built into the topography in China. Arecibo's collapse was set into motion in 2017 by Hurricane Maria and its Category 4 winds, causing sufficient damage to lead the NSF to recommend closing the observatory. The telescope's supports began failing in August of 2020 when a cable broke, followed by another main cable, which detached 2 months later from one of the 3 concrete towers. This led the NSF to conclude that repairs were just too dangerous to proceed with and put plans in motion to bring the telescope down in a controlled demolition. But physics got there first. On December 1st, 2020, another main cable failed, sending the 900-ton platform suspended above the dish crashing down. This week marks the anniversary of the collapse of another radio telescope, one that would be rebuilt though, this time in Green Bank, West Virginia. And it remains today the world's largest steerable radio telescope at 100 meters wide. The current telescope replaces the slightly smaller 300-foot radio telescope, which collapsed on November 15, 1988, when a single plate connecting 2 beams near the top of the structure failed, reducing the entire instrument into a heap of twisted girders in moments. Green Bank is known for its location inside the National Radio Quiet Zone, a square of about 100 miles on each side, which spans the Allegheny Mountains in West Virginia into the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Inside this zone, broadcast transmitters are restricted to reduce power, with the strictest rules applying closest to the observatory. Emergency services and things like NOAA Weather Radio are given some special treatment, but TV stations in the Harrisburg, Staunton, and Charlottesville markets, they've got to coordinate their operations with the Green Bank Observatory. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, November 15th, 1989 was a heartbreaking day for Huntsville, Alabama. An F4 tornado hit the southern part of the city, crossing through a busy business section and heavily populated residential area at the time of afternoon rush hour. 21 people were killed, 18 died in the tornado, and 3 others later from injuries. 57% of the deaths occurred in automobiles. For the storm data summary, quote, most of those killed in the cars were in the process of performing normal tasks, as opposed to fleeing in or seeking the automobiles for safety. Over 450 people were injured in this tornado event. Along the 18.5-mile path, 249 homes, 80 businesses, 3 churches, and 10 public buildings were destroyed. The National Weather Service in Huntsville has an extensive collection of videos, reports, and written interviews on their website. I was reading through the interviews, and this one, 20 years after the event, from James Johnson, stuck out to me. It shows the impacts from a major tornado don't just last for a few minutes or a few days, they last a lifetime. From Mr. Johnson, I do not remember the actual tornado. It hit us while we were driving north on the parkway, and I was knocked out upon impact with the twister. We were just south of Airport Road. The next thing I remember, I was in Huntsville Hospital being asked if I was on any medications, and then I was told to go back to sleep. My late wife, Rosa, was taken to Humana Hospital. She was found laying in a ditch on South Parkway. She died due to her injuries 63 days after the tornado on January 17, 1990. I was moved to Health South Rehabilitation at the end of November and remained there until the 3rd week of January 1990. By mid-February, I returned to work on Redstone Arsenal and worked up to 4 years ago, at which time I retired. With age creeping up on me, my injuries have placed me in a wheelchair most of the time. This has been my life for the past 20 years.
That's a great piece, Jen. That tornado means a lot to me. I obviously worked it, and I was there the next day, and it was surreal. The snow squalls that were coming in on top of the tornado debris field in Huntsville was just horrible. But there was no warning for that tornado. This is before Doppler radar. It was a cell merger with a squall line. And it was a Wednesday afternoon, middle of afternoon drive time, and it was just a really bad situation. But that was a great piece. But I will never forget standing in that tornado debris field. You could not even see across the street. The snow was so heavy on the 15th of November, 1980, to the 16th of November, 1999 in Huntsville. So good story. In fact, Jen, let's just go to you for your pick of the week while you've got the floor. What you got for us?
All righty. Yeah. As of yesterday, it was a huge anniversary of the La Plata, Maryland tornado, November 9th, 1926. Just a devastating event. 17 people were killed, 13, though, were children at the La Plata Elementary School. And this is one of the events that we're going to be researching on Wednesday when we go to La Plata. They've had at least 2 or 3 major events in that town, and we're going to go and do a deep dive. But when we're doing our research, one of our major sources is Find a Grave. And so if you're looking at tornado events and you're wanting to find out the names of those who passed away, Find a Grave is a great place to go. And they oftentimes, for some of these bigger disasters, will actually have a memorial page, and they have one for the La Plata event. So that is my pick of the week.
Indeed. And again, all these picks will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com, in our show notes. Rick Smith, I know you got something good for us. Go.
Yeah, I have to endorse that Find a Grave site. It is extremely beneficial for researching tornado deaths and genealogy and lots of other stuff. My pick of the week is Jen mentioned Nelson Tucker earlier. Well, the Otis Project that Nelson's a part of is going to be having a free webinar on November 18th. And my pick of the week is the link to register for that. This is kind of time sensitive, so if you're listening or watching after November 18th, I hope you can go and find it somewhere. But really, it's going to be a really interesting webinar to talk about the important work they're doing. One of the coolest research projects that's going on out there. So that's my pick.
Awesome. And I just saw breaking news. The Senate has passed opening the government, so now it goes to the House, and hopefully the paychecks will return sooner than later, which would be good. And
hopefully
we'll
within the year. Yeah.
Yeah, within the year, hopefully. All right, Troy Kimmel, give us a pick of the week. Go.
Don't get me down that path.
Yeah.
With this all in Tom's time and Fred's time on the Edmund Fitzgerald, the New York Times, and one of my colleagues here on WeatherBrains, I believe, John, you found this, but New York Times has done a follow-up article, and it's really not an article so much as Gilbert Cruz in the New York Times did sort of a podcast with John Bacon, who wrote Gales of November, I think, the author. And he has like a 43-minute podcast on the New York Times. I tried to gift that so we can put it so people can see it. But my pick of the week.
Good deal. And mine, I stole one from John Gordon. The Weather Service in Marquette has a page on the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald with a lot of really good resources and data there. So that'll be my pick. So, John Gordon, I stole yours. What you got?
Yes, sir. And also November 10th, 1989, Huntsville. I spun up the Huntsville office, 4:40 in the afternoon. It profoundly changed the entire country of the weather enterprise. Yeah. Bob Barron, the whole thing. Never forget that. Okay, my picks of the week. I have a double pick. I'll tag up on what Troy just said, that podcast from the New York Times. The book is called The Gales of November, The Untold Story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. This guy went and talked to a few of the family members who would talk and really found out who everyone was. It's very good. Also, Steve Ackerman's a professor at University of Wisconsin. It is fabulous. He goes through line by line of the song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and goes through the weather slide by slide. It's very good. Check that out on Picks of the Week.
Awesome. And again, this will be on weatherbrains.com. Tom, we have stalled long enough, and you've stuck with us. And we know that you've got something that's really cool, that's weather related. So give us a good pick. Go.
Yeah, I might have a quick double for you. For more on the Fitzgerald, when I was not gray and not old, I was on a show about the Fitzgerald called Dive Detectives. I think you can find it on Amazon Prime. It's just an hour long, and I filmed all day out on Lake Michigan with them, although everything I said got contracted into about 60 seconds of airtime. But if you want to find out, like I said, we didn't get into the details of the theories of what led to the sinking. But if you watch that show, you'll hear some of those theories, because that if people are interested in some of those things, whether rogue wave or whether it ran aground, all those things, that's something you can check out. It was Dive Detectives, Edmund Fitzgerald. If you Google it, you'll probably find it. And then the only other thing I want to mention is this wasn't the only historical event I ever kind of did a hindcast of, so to speak. There's one even older. I don't know if you guys have ever covered it, but it's the deadliest wildfire in American history from Peshtigo, Wisconsin. October 8th, 1871, over 2,000 people perished. And that's a really interesting event. If you ever want to dig into that, I've got some material on that event that I'd be more than happy to talk about in the future sometime.
Is it online where people can see this, or
like the 1871 Peshtigo fire? It'll pop up. One of the things with it is it sort of was forgotten because it was the same day as the Great Chicago Fire. which obviously stole all the headlines. But the number of fatalities in Peshtigo far exceeded, and I've visited the museum there and the cemetery, and it's a sobering thing when you look at it. And you talk about not knowing weather in 1975. Well, imagine 1871. So
wow,
just
goodness gracious. Well, those are great. And again, Tom, thank you. And for those that are listening, you might want to go back and watch the video replay because Tom's graphics and slides were just incredible. Tom, that was a great presentation. Thank you. And again, we have learned so much, at least I have learned so much about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald 50 years ago today. But if you're new here, WeatherBrains is typically on the air every Monday night at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. If you'd like to watch, you can watch it live or watch it later. But we know that most of you listen. If you watch, listen, thank you. And if you want to get in touch with us, you know the deal. The email address, it's simply this, email@weatherbrains.com. On behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week and God bless. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you,
show.
Tom.
Great show.
Thank you, Tom.
Great show.
Great stuff.
Excellent.
Great
Loved
show.
it. Good stuff.
Thanks, John.
Thanks,
for
John.